Hi, I'm Mark Madison at the National Conservation Training Center in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And I'd like to welcome you to another of our series in Conservationists in Action. And today we're very fortunate to have with us Taggart Siegel. He's the director and producer of a very new film called Queen of the Sun. What are the bees telling us? Welcome, Taggart. I'm really glad you're out here. Taggart's going to screen his film this evening out here. We're very excited about that. And we took the opportunity of his being in the vicinity to bring him into the studio and learn a little more about the film, learn a little more about pollinators and bees in particular, and a little more about you, Taggart. So thank you very much. We really appreciate you coming out here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm sure it's been a very busy whirlwind
It
last couple of months or so.
I've been in Chicago recently, in Madison, and San Francisco, and I finally was able to come out here, so thank you for inviting me.
Oh, great. Well, before we jump into your newest film, I thought it'd be interesting to find out a little more about how you became a filmmaker and maybe some of the other films you worked on before this.
Well, my last film before Queen of the Sun, What Are the Bees Telling Us, was The Real Dirt on Farmer John. So it's about a very eccentric farmer in the Midwest, losing his farm, getting his farm back, resurrecting it, and creating a very powerful CSA farm, community-supported agricultural farm. But I've made films on a lot of social issues, made films about, I produced a film on orangutans, Disenchanted Forest it's called, it's a film that we went to Borneo and filmed orangutans in the forest and being rehabbed. So that was a beautiful film. And then my other films are on Hmong refugees, shamans from Southeast Asia that came to Chicago after being in the mountains of Laos to high-rise tenement houses in Chicago. And then they're trying to reconnect with their spirit ancestors in their high-rise tenement house and doing their shamanic practices. This is in the early 80s, and then I followed up with the same family in 2001 for PBS. And I'm thinking about going back and following up. Now their kids are growing up. What's happening with that tradition?
Yeah, we lived through that in central Wisconsin, actually.
Yeah.
We had a very large Hmong population settle in my hometown. And you're right, now we're up to the second or third generation. That sounds like a fascinating series.
Yeah.
Tell me a little about the orangutan film.
Well, the orangutan film was filmed out of that real desperate kind of need to understand what's happening to the orangutan. Especially in Borneo, the logging has been very intensive, so a lot of their habitat has been destroyed. In fact, there's only like less than 5% of their habitat intact, and there's many palm plantations that have been set up that are really hurting the orangutans, because these palm plantations, they cut down the forests where all these incredible animals live, including the rhinoceros hornbill bird that is able to crack these nuts to plant these incredible trees that have existed for millions of years or thousands of years. And it's just incredible how we're losing these forests. But this is a kind of an upbeat film in a way, because it shows orangutans being rehabbed and put back into the forest. So it's a very beautiful connection with seeing how they taking these stolen orangutans that have been in the hands of traders and then confiscating them and then bringing them to a rehab center and really teaching them how to be an orangutan in a forest instead of a nun. One orangutan was grown up in a nunnery, and so it knew how to pray, but it didn't know how to survive in the forest.
And what was the name of the orangutan film?
Disenchanted Forest.
We'll have to check that out. Yeah. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's move on to your current project, and we're going to show a trailer in just a second, but I thought before we did, how did you become interested in bees and pollinators?
Yeah, Queen of the Sun came to me after The Real Dirt on Farmer John, and a couple years went by, and I was like, what's my next documentary? And I read an article in an environmental magazine, and it basically stated that if bees die out, man has 4 years to live. And it was a quote by Einstein, and it's been very disputed, that quote, but it shows up everywhere. But it's in a lot of magazines and books even. And it really frightened me. Having a 3-year-old at that time, I was like seeing that bees are disappearing, they're dying out. I can't live in this world with bees dying out. I mean, I thought global warming was enough to handle, but bees disappearing. And in that split second, I knew that was my next film.
Great. Well, let's see a trailer of that,
Okay.
and that'll kind of cue up a discussion of this new film.
Okay.
The relationship of bees and flowers is one of the most beautiful co-evolutionary relationships we have. Bees are the legs of plants.
Beekeepers, they are chosen by bees. You can brush by mustache. And they like.
If bees left this world, I wouldn't like it because there'd be no honey, yeah, and no fruit.
Colony collapse disorder is the bill we are getting for all we have done to the bees.
If we didn't have bees to pollinate our crops, we'd have to eat just bread and oatmeal, you know, all the time, and a couple of nuts.
If bees are dying, birds will be dying, plants will be dying.
We could call it colony collapse disorder of the human being too. Steiner's prediction has come true.
So many of the problems we face come down to one thing, and that is monoculture.
The bees can't even live there, they'll starve to death.
From the point of view of nature, it's insane.
We've bred a race of super mites with every new chemical we throw at them.
Pesticides came from warfare. And of course, they instantly killed the pollinators.
When you see an airplane spraying, there's this tremendous feeling of not being able to do anything. I really don't want to lose them.
I'm really finding out why I'm beekeeping is to keep that going for my children's children.
Our very lives depend on beekeeping. The bees sort of let me know, go ahead, we'll help you. Honeybee sanctuaries are springing up like mushrooms in this country.
And they're coming closer. Only in the Bronx, baby. Where are you going to find a swarm?
You see the little antennae? It's lovely.
Oh, look at this. Dripping with honey.
People say that they can't keep bees. They're lying.
Very nice trailer.
Thank you.
Having just seen the film recently, very true to the film. And let me ask about the way you approach the film. You instead of just doing a traditional nature documentary, perhaps just telling the story of the bees with the omniscient narrator, you seem to tell it through a wide variety of characters from around the world. What made you choose that strategy?
Well, I really felt that the story needed to be told by the beekeepers. And I started seeing all the beekeepers as one, instead of like, because there were so many of them. I mean, I filmed like maybe 30 beekeepers, and I had to narrow it down, and scientists. So I started seeing Michael Pollan and Vandana Shiva and Raj Patel and others kind of as the chorus of the film. And then I saw the beekeepers as the characters of the film. And then I saw the scientists as the kind of the outer skeleton body of the film. So they were all supporting each other to connect us with bees, and bees, of course, are the main character. So it was a difficult film in the sense of where's the unified voice? Well, the unified voice is the story that's being told somewhat through the bees' point of view, or through their eyes and what they're going through to live on this earth.
That's fascinating. I wish I'd known that before I watched the film. I like the Greek chorus analogy, because you're right, you have these beekeepers talking about their personal passion for bees and so
Yeah.
on, but then Michael Pollan or an entomologist will come on and say, well, this is the cause of this decline. So that's very clever, clever strategy. You said you became interested in this because of the pressures on bees, the dangers on bees. What's happening to bees in the world right now?
Well, we're in a real crisis. I really think this is one of the most serious crises on hand, even more serious in ways than global warming, if you really want to look at it, because bees keep us alive. They keep ecosystems going. So we could say 1 in every 4 bites that we eat is pollinated by a bee, but you could go further than that. A lot of our forests are pollinated by insects too. And without these forests, plants will disappear, or without these pollinators, plants would disappear and birds would disappear and the whole ecosystems would collapse. So it's like a major thing. And with colony collapse disorder, it is, as Gunther Hawk says, the beekeeper in the film, it's the sledgehammer that is waking us up. We were not awakened when bees were dying out in the 1960s, when Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, came out and warned us pesticides are going to do a lot of damage. And we didn't quite wake up then. There was a great bee die-off during that later, even in the 90s with varroa mite, and just millions of bees died, and it looked like the hush of the bees. I think it was a New York Times article. So there was always been die-offs of bees. Even in the 1800s there were die-offs of bees, but not colony collapse disorder, where bees disappear from their hive and do not reappear. And so we're really at this point, like, where I think we all need to be concerned, not just scientists.
What exactly is colony collapse disorder? Talk a little more about that.
Yeah.
When we discovered it, and what we know, if anything, about the causes of it.
Yeah, 2006 is when that word was used, that phrase, colony collapse disorder. And it's a phenomenon where bees disappear from their hives. The queen is there, honey could be there, but the bees are gone. They don't make it back to the hive. So that's different from the other disasters with bees, in the sense that maybe the bees made it back, but they're dying out. But now it's bees aren't making it back to the hive. So they call it colony collapse disorder. And they're not pinpointed to one thing. So I see it as a real sort of a cocktail that we've created over the last even 60 years or so to create this decline of bees, honeybees.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a personal question. When you're a filmmaker and you're investigating a scientific issue, you said you came across this in an environmental magazine, how do you go and bring yourself up to speed on the science of something like colony collapse disorder?
Well, you start reading everything that's out there, and you start reading books on bees and trying to understand bees, and wow, they are really, they pollinate this much. They're keeping us alive. I mean, that's the first thing that kind of hit me. And then for me, it's like the wonder and the awe of what bees have been doing over the last millions of years sort of connected me on an emotional level. So it's not just like bees are disappearing. It's like, wow, bees have been studied by, the Egyptians, the Greeks. The Greeks even had coins that had a coin that had the bee on it, or the Mayans that worship the bees. You see them on pots where the shaman is holding up a bee, and it's in the film, and it's amazing. Or in Egypt, where they put honey in the tombs of the deceased, and this honey is still edible, which is such a miracle. And so I look at all those things like, wow, I have a film here not only on the awe and inspiration of bees and how they live in service, pollinating and helping the world, they're also just so fascinating. But then scientifically, I'm also curious, like, well, what is causing colony collapse disorder? I want to hear from scientists. And so I interviewed entomologists like May Berenbaum and Scott Black from the Xerces Society, and Johannes Wirtz, who's a biochemist, and Vandana Shiva, who's a physicist. So we have scientists, but they actually seen it through their scientific lens, but also as a compassionate person that cares about the environment. So, yeah.
One of the interesting things was you did have a historical component to it, going back to ancient Egyptians and even earlier.
Yeah.
Why do you think ancients were so interested in bees? Did they actually know about the pollination, or was it just they liked honey? I mean,
yeah.
Because that was a lot of nature documentaries are fairly presentist. And one of the interesting things of yours is actually you made the analogy to Rachel Carson. You point out how they've been an important icon for our species for a long time. Any speculation on why we are so attracted to bees?
I think that the ancients knew they were initiates. The initiates knew that they were something special, that bees were the things that were connected with fertility. And fertility is everything when you're in the Nile Valley and you need a whole, your whole land needs to be, with crops and fertility. And somehow they knew back 5,000 years ago that bees were really important. In fact, they've named certain regions in Egypt as the bee land. And this was back then. So they were able to worship the bee in a way that was giving thanks to them. And I think that's where we've lost our reverence and awe for the bee. Not that we have to get down on our hands and knees and start worshiping bees, but I do think there's this sacred connection between honey and bees, and how cultures from the beginning of time have really respected bees. Now the bees have gotten very mechanized. We treat bees like, how much can we get out of them? How much can we use their pollination service, and how much honey can we get? So we end up trucking the bees across the country, and it's very damaging to bees. And we throw pesticides and all these things that are very, very hard on bees. But we've kind of lost that respect. And actually, I feel that we're regaining sort of this awe for the thing that's keeping us alive. And I love it. I mean, I see people writing us all the time that are just completely, I didn't know that about bees. I was so scared about bees, and now I'm not that scared. Now I'm going to really start planting a garden.
Yeah, that's actually a takeaway. And I watched this with my 10-year-old and 6-year-old. And they, of course, are information sponges. That's what kids like, and they learned a lot about bees. They've been repeating it ever since. So, I mean, that's
great.
One more plug I'd make for the film. It's very child-friendly.
Yeah.
It's a sophisticated film, but it's accessible to everyone. How do you feel about bees?
Yeah, bees, they grew on me. I mean, it's not like the first time I started filming, I love bees. I mean, the first thing I shot on bees was the woman dancing with 12,000 bees on her body. And she called me up. It opens the film. Sarah Marpelli called me up and said, I hear you're making a film about bees. Would you like to film me dancing with bees? And I said, sure. And it was quite something to see the beekeeper she actually put bee queen pheromone oil on her body to attract the bees. And the beekeeper brought the bees out and tried to put them onto her body. And the bees weren't that interested. This was a chemical that they developed in the laboratory, and they weren't that interested. They were interested in the queen. The queen is what the females, there's 90% worker bees in the hive, and the worker bees are the females. They love their queen, and they will do anything to be with their queen. So after all this time, the beekeeper could not get the bees to be on her body, so he said, okay, I got to get the queen out. So he got the queen out, put her in a cage, tied it around her neck, and then had to get the bees out of the tree because they swarmed up there, and he had to get them and put them on her body. And then they all just like armor, like a bikini or whatever, just went onto her. And it was amazing to see the relationship of this person who's willing to dance with bees. But that was just the first shoot. But for me, it was exploring how biodynamic and organic beekeepers were working with bees, and if they had deeper insights into this. And then I started exploring about Rudolf Steiner, because he actually wrote in 1923, he did 7 lectures on bees that are really amazing. They're scientific, they're spiritual, they're all sorts of things. But he was talking to Mueller, who was a beekeeper back then, 1923, and Mueller was very excited about queen breeding. Let's breed queens. And Steiner thought it wasn't a very good idea because it's going to have detrimental effects in 80 to 100 years. And that's now. And so we're seeing the decline of honeybees, and it has something to do with the mechanized method of beekeeping, but also over queen breeding, where the genetic stock gets lessened. And Steiner knew this, and so that really helped kind of guide the film. And then speaking to many of the beekeepers, such as Gunther Friedman, Gunther Hawk, and Jacqueline Freeman, all really incredible beekeepers. But I went all over the world to find beekeepers that could tell stories about bees and why they think colony collapse disorder is happening, and also the wonder of bees. So you kind of get it all in one.
So did you take some of that in? Were you affected by your subject, or did you remain objective behind the lens?
Well, you can't really with somebody like with Yvon Houchard, the Frenchman who tickles his bees with his mustache. He's also a bee historian, so he starts talking about like the history of bees from Aristotle to the Egyptians to present day. You're kind of taken by him, but he's also doing these amazing things with his bees, chanting to them. He actually recites poetry to them, Rimbaud, to his bees. And I'm filming, I'm like, this is exactly what a documentary filmmaker kind of footage we want to get, because we also want to entertain our audience to also be able to go into the subject on a deeper level. So there's always this balance in the film, like how to be really scientific, how to be really informational, how to be at the same time maybe a little bit spiritual. You don't want to get too spiritual because you're going to turn your audience off. You don't want to get too scientific because you might turn some of your audience off. And we want it for a very general audience to appreciate and to enjoy bees and also see the serious problem we're in.
You interviewed a lot of beekeepers, and they're by far the most interesting group in the film because they're all so different and so on. But were there some common characteristics you noted among the 30 or so beekeepers you interviewed, not all of which are probably made into the final film?
They all love their bees. They all absolutely fall in love with their bees. And now I'm a beekeeper, and it took me a while to actually appreciate bees on that level. The more you're around them, especially bees that you raise yourself, they become almost like a family member. So I understand when a beekeeper starts saying there is something that happens. You can't pet bees. You can't, it's not like a cat or a dog, but there's this something that happens. And I think it's that they're producing this incredible thing called honey, and that the beehive, there are 30,000, as E.O. Wilson would say, that's a superorganism. That one bee cannot live outside the hive more than 24 hours or it will die out because of, even if you give it enough warmth, enough food, it'll die out. And those kind of things, like, it made me really realize we're dealing with this superorganism, but something that is highly intelligent, that they're working in an intelligence that we probably don't quite understand, but what they do, you know, the waggle dance when they're going to find where the best pollination source is, or the best nectar source, and the whole alignment with the sun, and they do this dance, and they're all doing it for the hive. They're all serving the hive in the highest capacity. And so when colony collapse disorder happens and they can't navigate back to their hive, you know something serious has happened. Like, you know, is it the pesticides? Is it over queen breeding? Is it viruses? Is it pathogens? You know, so many different things.
That may be one affinity we have with bees, is that they have societies, it seems, and they function and build upon themselves. Yes. You noted in the film, or Michael Pollan did, there's another affinity we have with bees as regards sense of smell. Tell us a little about that.
That's Michael Pollan loves talking about the relationship between bees and the flower, let's say. That bees and flowers, bees are the legs of the plant for the bees, and this is the way that the they passed on their genetics. Flowers is to recruit bees, and Michael Pollan's so brilliant about talking. And it's one of the greatest mysteries in life. He says the relationship, how bees and man had the same sense of smell. What we like is what bees like. What bees like is what we like to smell. And as Michael Pollan says in the film, it's different because, you know, flies like the things that smell awful, but they also pollinate. And it's so, you know, it's just like these subjects are so fascinating to me, and it brings me more into being in touch with nature. Why I love nature even more after making this film is because now I do not walk anywhere without looking for insects. I am so like, where are the insects? Oh, there's no bumblebees. When I came in today into the main building, there were black bumblebees that were going up into the roof area, probably looking for a little home. But it was beautiful to see these incredible black bumblebees, especially knowing that a lot of bumblebees are going extinct now.
Is there any hope for the bees? I mean, are there any promising signs?
I think it's just going to get worse. I'm really feeling like the monoculture, Michael Pollan says the #1 problem we have, it comes down to monoculture. If you look at, you know, in the film where we show 740,000 acres of just almonds, where 50 weeks out of the 52 weeks, 50 weeks, bees or pollinators can't live in that area. That's 740,000 acres. Only those 2 weeks can bees, and they're trucked in to pollinate. So we've created this system that is so out of sync with nature. Like, nature needs diversity, and we've created, you know, one crop system, and therefore we're much more reliant on using lots of pesticides. And some of these pesticides are the neonicotinoids that are being blamed. They're produced by Bayer. They're being blamed for the decline of bees greatly. Like, they're seeing that, as Mae Berenbaum says, you know, they're neurotoxic. It affects their memory, and they can't navigate themselves back to the hive. So it's so interesting that in France and Italy and even Germany, they banned these neonicotinoids. And it hasn't been banned here, and there's serious neonicotinoids being put into our environment, like billions of gallons every year going into our soil. And it's systemic, so it goes into the plant, and it completely covers the plant completely. And so the bees take that nectar and the pollen, and it's loaded with pesticides. So
You were talking about different countries having different reactions to this.
Mm.
You also did something interesting, and you interviewed different beekeepers on,
Yeah.
on different continents. Were there cultural differences with the beekeepers?
You know, in New Zealand and Australia, those were two other places that we filmed. They learned a lot from England, so they're not really different, but they still have this natural way of, like most farms have bees on it. It's still a way of life. Sir Edmund Hillary was a beekeeper. It was just a natural thing to do, and that's kind of changing too, because they're getting more into bigger agriculture, and they actually have the neonicotinoids in their country. And just last week an article came out that they have colony collapse disorder now, and they never thought they were going to get it. They thought, oh, we're not, you know, we're an isolated island. But what's happened is they got varroa mite on the South Island recently, 2 years ago, and now they're using lots of chemicals in the hives to kill the mites, which eventually create super mites. And most beekeepers are saying these chemicals don't work anymore. The varroa mite is too strong. So these different cultures, I think they approach it differently. I didn't film in Africa or Southeast Asia. I would have loved to. We didn't have the budget for that. Or Africa up in the volcano region where there's some great beekeepers. So culturally, I feel like, you know, in Europe there was appreciation for honey and bees much greater than in America. Because I think in Europe, I think they just get they love their honey. They love their bees, and the French are passionate about it. They'll march. All the beekeepers marched. And they did it in England, too. They marched, you know, to ban these pesticides, and they've been effective. I don't know if beekeepers in America would go out and march, but it would be great.
But you did point out a protest in New York,
Yes,
didn't you? Tell us
that's
a little
right.
about that.
Well, in New York City, during Giuliani's time, he slipped in to ban honeybees, beekeeping in New York City, and because there's a dangerous animal, or poisonous, and so he supposedly didn't like bees, and so it's taken 20 years or so to reverse this ban. And I filmed in Queen of the Sun, What Are the Bees Telling Us, the marching and the demonstration, and politicians came out, and there was a lot of press on it, and they've reversed that, and now it's legal to be a beekeeper in New York. And what I love about all these cities that are very passionate, Mayor Daley in Chicago is he just even though he's stepping down, last thing he did recently on Arbor Day was to go thank the beekeepers, because he sees the connection. He's done a great work on the environment in Chicago, and they have bees up on City Hall, and they have bees in Portland, Oregon, where I'm from. The mayor, Sam Adams, is a beekeeper. So New York City, it's incredible that there's so many beekeepers there, and they're all doing it somewhat illegally. Now it's legal, and they're up on rooftops, and the only swarm I've ever seen, like full-fledged swarm, is in Queen of the Sun in the Bronx on the rooftop, when the swarm just came right at us and landed on a tree like 10 feet away. And it was just like, wow, in the Bronx? Where are they getting their pollen and their nectar? But then you find out there's, you know, the big parks around there.
Is that where they're getting? Because I was shocked how many beekeepers there were in seriously urban areas like the Bronx. So they're almost they're like the old pigeon coops they had on tops of the roof.
Yeah, that's true.
So there were a significant number of beekeepers?
Well, in Chicago, there's 8,000 registered beekeepers. And what's concerning beekeepers everywhere is, well, in Chicago, they've lost 80% of their bees this year. So the weather's been maybe attributed to that. Colony collapse is part of it, but it's been a really rough winter. you know, spring is, it's out of kilter, and bees don't like coming out. Honeybees don't like coming out unless the weather's warm enough. And so even though some trees were out to be pollinated, there were no pollinators out there pollinating. So nature is just kind of like out of whack right now.
One of the other tensions with bees that comes out in your film is they sting us.
Yeah.
They're mildly toxic.
Yeah.
How is that addressed in your film?
Well, we do it kind of humorously. Like, I've been stung, you know, and we show a New Zealand beekeeper, like, on his hand, he sees the stinger, and he shows us how to remove the stinger. And then we go into Yvan Huchard, the Frenchman, who talks about, you know, you could be stung like, you know, 499 bees and you're okay, but the 500, it might kill you. You know, somebody could possibly die if they're severely allergic on one bee sting.
Yes.
But most people aren't really allergic to bees. They might swell up, but that doesn't mean you're going to die.
Right.
You don't have to be rushed to the hospital or anything. So I think there's this long-term memory. May Berenbaum, the entomologist, was talking about that bee stings are stored in our long-term memory. So we always remember when we've been stung. And that's why we have the fear that we do of bees. And bees are really just trying to teach us to have respect, like just, you know, stay away. But oftentimes, we're stung by yellow jackets, and those are wasps. And they're carnivores, they eat meat, whereas bees are vegetarian, and they eat off the nectar. But when you're around that picnic table and you get stung, people say, I've been stung by a bee, and it's often the yellow jackets. So we show that in the film with animation. In fact, we use a lot of animation in Queen of the Sun to illustrate, because how can you possibly show a nuptial flight where the queen flies up, she's just born at 4 days or a week, she leaves the hive and flies up to do her marriage flight 600 feet up in the sky. We can't film that, so we animated it, and where she mates with up to 10 to 15 different drones, the males, and she flies through the drone where the drones hang out. They're waiting for the queen to fly through them, and then all the drones fly up after her, and the strongest drone gets to mate with her. And that's nature at the best. Like, this is the strongest drone that gets to mate with the strongest queen. And so we animated that beautiful, like, dance, and she comes back and she has the sperm from all 12 different male bees, and she gets to lay 1,500 eggs to 2,000 eggs a day. Wow. That's more than her body weight. And that's what is such a miracle. It's like how all those worker bees, all the females, are tending to her. And all those worker bees have given up they've renounced their sexuality. They're really at service for the queen. And, you know, if that queen dies, then they'll make a new queen. But it's just really to keep that queen really happy, feeding her royal jelly and, you know, really good honey.
It seems like some of the poetry rubbed off on you from the beekeepers,
yeah,
too.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
We're running out of time, Taggart, so I'm going to ask you one last question. There's the film, like you said, has beekeepers, it has scientists, it has agricultural critics and proponents and so on. There's a lot of different voices in this. In fact, how many characters are in the film?
There's probably 10 different characters. Yeah.
If you had to, without the narration and the omniscient narrative, if people were to take a message from the film, what would that be?
I really think that it's like learn to love nature again. It's like if we, like a child, like your children, they have their love for nature and bees. My child does the same thing. They get it immediately. It's kind of like we need to reconnect with the simple things in nature and look at a bee in a different way and say thank you to that bee for keeping us going, or all those pollinators, because those birds flying that's probably why there's the birds and the bees, because they all interrelate. And it's to me it's as simple as that. Just let's all plant, pollinator friendly flowers. We could all be beekeepers in that way. We could really help out. Let's not use toxic chemicals on our lawns, because that's really creating havoc in our ecosystems. And I know there's so many products out there to destroy bees or to destroy insects on our lawn. And, we really have to be very careful because we're doing a lot of damage in our backyard. So if we could, create a more natural habitat, you're gonna start seeing the birds and the bees return, and that brings a lot of joy in life.
That's a great way to go out. It's reminiscent of Carson, who we talked about before,
Yeah.
her call to have a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
That's really what your characters do have.
Yeah.
They have a childlike awe and
Yeah.
respect and empathy.
Yeah.
Well, beautiful film.
Thank you.
The name of the film is Queen of the Sun, What Are the Bees Telling Us? If you wanted to learn more about the film, you can go to www.queenofthesun.com. We're going to show it out here tonight, and I hope people have a chance to go see it at the theaters near them. And in fact, if people did want to see it, I think you had a suggestion.
Yeah,
also,
come
Taggart.
to our website and you go to the upcoming screenings, and it's playing in about 60 different cities around the country. It's opening in New York June 10th, and LA June 17th, but it could open in your town too. So my suggestion is write us at Queen of the Sun and suggest your local theater, and we will contact that theater and bring it to them. And also Facebook us. I know Facebook is but it's a beautiful way to kind of connect a lot of people. And so you go Queen of the Sun Facebook and like us, and it's just, we want to hear your stories.
Thank you very much, Taggart.
Great, thank
really
you.
Appreciate this. It was
Appreciate
very
it.
fun. Thank
Yeah.
you for tuning in this afternoon and learning a little more about pollinators and the new film Queen of the Sun. We appreciate your time.